My name is Thomas Taylor. I was a squad boss on the incident that will be discussed. I received the page to report to my duty station at 0:48 the morning of July 11th. The 20-person crew I was assigned to consisted of people from 3 separate ranger districts. The crews were compiled in the early morning, and we arrived at the fire at approximately 0900 that same morning. The fire was located in a steep, narrow canyon with 3,000 vertical feet of terrain on both sides. The fuel type consisted of an overstory of spruce, Douglas fir, lodgepole, and ponderosa pine, as well as cottonwoods. The understory consisted of birch trees and a large variety of shrubs and bushes. There was also a heavy concentration of dead and down material on the forest floor. At that time, the temperature was about 70 degrees, with a relative humidity of about 50%, and the winds were calm. Initial size-up of the fire showed that the main body of the fire was contained between the road and the river, with a number of small spot fires across the river to the east burning in a riparian zone. The resources available consisted of our 20-person Type 2 crew, 2 Mark III pumps, 1,500 feet of hose, numerous gated Ys, fittings, and nozzles. The hotshot crew had done some preliminary line cutting and would be departing the incident for a rest period. Air support had been ordered, but its arrival time was unknown. We received our briefing about 10:30. The tactics consisted of the following. The crew would be split into 3 squads. Squad 1 was assigned to take care of a slop-over on the main fire, then would proceed across the river to aid in the suppression of the spots. Squad 2 would be in charge of the setup and operation of the pumps. My squad, Squad 3, was supposed to anchor into existing hand line and flank the largest spot fire, using hand tools and a progressive hose lay. The remaining crew member would be our lookout, and would be placed in a rock outcropping to the east of the fires. The escape routes for this incident were clearly marked and easily accessible, back down the line, across the log, and to the road. We engaged the fire around 1100 hours. Temperatures at this time were in the 80s, with a relative humidity of about 20%, and the winds were calm. Squads 2 and my squad, Squad 3, moved the pumps and hoses across the log to the east side of the river. From there, my squad then proceeded to the anchor point and started with our operations. As the day progressed, a number of problems occurred. With numerous spot fires, heavy torching, and extreme fire behavior, additional resources were ordered, pump operations were abandoned, and the lookout was removed from their position as fire activity increased beyond our control. It was then that we decided to disengage the incident and retreat to our safety zone, a riparian zone next to the road, later known as the lunch spot. We were greeted by the hotshot crew, which was called back after 2 hours of rest. A district AFMO arrived shortly thereafter. At this time, all personnel on the fire were at the lunch spot. By this point in time, a break was needed. We sharpened tools, ate lunch, filled our canteens, and observed a full-on crown fire. Weather taken at the lunch spot indicated temperatures of 87 degrees, relative humidities at 17%, and winds 5 to 6 miles per hour.
Firefighters work in a dynamic environment. The only real constant is change. Paul Gleason, an ex-hotshot supervisor and a creator of LCES, once said that fire supervisors are asked to make complex decisions given limited information in a dynamic environment. This is true. At times, a fire situation can change so fast that it's hard to keep current on your situational awareness. We have to realize, however, that at these times of rapid change, a valid situational awareness is the most important. It's always easy to be critical as a Monday morning quarterback, but as we go back to Tom and hear what actually happened, I want you to put yourselves on this fire and think about what you would do in this situation. Be specific. Would you call someone? Would you say something to someone? When? What exactly would you say? What are your concerns and how exactly would you address them? Let's go back to Tom and find out what happened.
Approximately 30 minutes into our break, The hotshot superintendent and his assistant scouted the road up the canyon from the lunch spot. At that same time, 2 engines proceeded past the lunch spot to patrol for spot fires up the road. Upon encountering a spot fire approximately 1/2 mile from the lunch spot, 1 engine radioed the IC and requested 1 squad to assist them in the handling of the fire. The IC then asked for the crew boss trainee and Squad 1 to head up the road with him and tie in with the engine. Once they arrived at the spot fire, they felt they needed some more assistance, so the crew boss trainee then radioed me and asked for my squad. I then rounded up my folks and we proceeded up the road, passing the crew boss trainee in an empty van as he was headed back to the lunch spot. We arrived at the spot fire and noticed the engine was departing. We then geared up and walked about 100 feet off the road and tied in with the IC and Squad 1. The spot fire was small in size, so I instructed my folks to help Squad 1 digging line. About 2 minutes go by and we receive a call from the hotshot superintendent that we should get back into the van and head back down the road to the lunch spot. Because they had left the lunch spot to assist in fire operations, based on the fire behavior, they made a no-go decision on the mission and went back down the road to the south, along with the remaining squad, the crew boss trainee, the 2 engines, and the district AFMO. We received another call that we should head out as quickly as possible. So the IC, my squad, and Squad 1 retreat back up to the road and pile into the 1 remaining van. Squad boss number 1 and 3 of his folks see that getting into the van was time-consuming, so they start off down the road on foot. The rest of us quickly get in the van and proceed down the road. While shadowing the 4 on foot, we get about 100 feet in front of them and we observe a wall of fire crossing the road, blocking our escape. We then turn the van around, pick up the 4 crew members from Squad 1, and drive up the road to the eventual deployment site. By this time, my blood was pumping, 14 people crammed inside 1 van. Emotions were running high. We drove up the road with fire behind us. Fire was now burning very hot on both sides of the road at enormous intensity. We stopped the van in an area that was green, calm, and open. The Chouach River ran smooth and calm in contrast to the heavy activity around us. We got out of the van to observe the fire. Some took pictures, others sat in bewilderment of what was happening. I puffed on a cigarette while pondering the events of that day. To the east, the fire was burning from point of origin up the canyon walls and scoured the upper third of the slope. The column of smoke was huge. Just as I put out my cigarette, a Dodge pickup had made its way down the road to our location. I quickly approached the vehicle and asked the driver where the road went. I was sadly informed that it was a dead end. My heart sank with the fact that we were trapped. 14 firefighters, 2 civilians, and no way out. I quickly told the IC, this is a dead-end road. He said, we will be safe here. We had 2 saws and had discussed reducing some of the fuels in the area, but the IC decided that that would not be necessary. So I thought it would be to my best interest to hike up into the rocks to get a better perspective on what was headed our way. I saw from a distance a full-on crown fire, consuming everything in its path from one side of the canyon to the other. But at the site, it was surprisingly calm. 5 crew members from the same district had sat down on 2 large boulders 15 feet from the road. The rest of the crew, now joined by 2 civilians, gathered on the road. The fire was now burning with tremendous energy, forming 2 columns. The column to the east was now huge, with the fire burning up the canyon floor, away from us to the northeast. The column to the west seemed more tame. Though it was devouring everything in its path, my view was blocked, so I could not see its full size. So basically, from my locations in the rocks, I could see 2 separate columns moving away from each other and forming a V. As time passed, that V kept moving closer and closer. "We will be safe here," kept running through my mind. I thought that I would stay in the rocks until it got too hot, and then I would head down to the road. As the V came overhead, I ran down the rocks towards the road. About 25 feet from the road, I was hit by an enormous wall of superheated air, as if I had run into a freight train. I then retreated back up into the rocks a short distance, tore off my pack, and grabbed my shelter. Tearing the tab off my shelter and pulling it out of its sheath was something I had only done in training. Now it was the real deal. With shelter in hand, I simply held it out in front of me. The winds opened it on its own like a parachute. The shelter was very tough to hold on to. Just before climbing in my shelter, I saw 5 folks running up the rocks towards me. They were only 15 to 20 feet below me, and I immediately yelled, "Deploy, deploy." I then put one foot in my shelter and rolled into it. The moment I entered my shelter, I was hit with intense heat and wind, instantly overcome with fear and terror. The fetal position allowed me to keep the shelter from burning me, as I was able to push it away from me with my right hand while holding down the shelter with my left arm and both feet. With intense heat and troubles breathing, it was not a good situation. I had to think fast. If I stay in this shelter, I will die. If I choose to leave my shelter, I will die, but I can't give up. So I made the decision to flee from my shelter down the rocks and to the river. With my last breath, I threw the shelter off of me, ran down through the smoke and fire, across the road, and dove into the river. The other firefighters and the 2 civilians joined me in the river approximately 15 minutes later. After a head count was done, we knew that there were 5 people missing. After the IC tried to contact the squad boss on the radio and having no return traffic, I climbed from the water and proceeded back up into the rocks and discovered 4 of my co-workers. Shouting their names yielded no response. With the intense heat being held in by the rocks, I returned back to the road and discovered one of the 5 in the van severely burned but alive. I then grabbed the IC's radio and notified air attack and coordinated our rescue. Yeah, it can happen real quick. Let your squad boss or let your crew boss know what's going on in your location. Really be assertive on what you're observing. Don't be complacent. You know, just because if you have a wind shift, you really need to stress that, regardless if it's just a real quick burst or a prolonged, definite wind shift out of direction, that type of thing. And you know, trust the feelings you have. You know, listen to your gut. If your gut's telling you it's not a good situation because of changing fire behavior, weather, stuff like that, then it's probably a good idea to let your squad boss or crew bosses know, and you know, take the steps to get out of there. You know, you assume that your escape routes and safety zones are going to be pretty clear and cut and dry and taken care of, but if your escape routes are cut off, then you know, where does your safety zone go from there? Is it safety zones? Is it plural or is it singular? Do you have one escape route to one safety zone, or do you have multiple escape routes to multiple safety zones? You need to really bide your time. Do you spend more time initial attacking a fire, or do you spend time on following a procedure and setting yourself up properly so you can have adequate safety zones and escape routes? If you prepare for the worst and you're geared up for the worst case scenario, but it doesn't turn out to be that way, then you're a winner. If you gear up for the worst case scenario and it does turn out to be the worst case scenario, but you survive that, then you're a winner as well. So it's a win-win situation, hoping, you know, and gearing up for the worst case scenario. Unfortunately, we put ourselves in that situation where we have to deal with those things. But
so not enough time to, at least for me, to have prepared myself in a safe way to go in the shelter. You know, as far as facing the correct direction, getting rid of your pack, fully extending the shelter. I went in from a prone position. I'd never trained. I trained from a standing position only. I deployed from the ground. So that was something I didn't know how to do, but I did it. I didn't do it as good as it could have been done. The shelter itself didn't fully extend. I was rolled up into a fetal position rather than a fully extended position. Therefore, I had less of a barrier, an insulation barrier in the shelter. I had less air to breathe, and that feeling of being curled up in that ball, I think, makes you feel even more kind of just more trapped, and that intensity is just kind of heightened. So, like anyone will ever tell you, for me, it was the most afraid I've ever been in my life, and everything that you've read about, people thinking about, you're going to die, feeling the presence of, death or darkness in there. I felt all of that. Fighting the urge to pull off the shelter and make a run for it or get out because you feel so trapped. Went through that. But then, for me, I guess one of the other things I'd say as far as a recommendation to firefighters also is, which most people already do, is to carry a tool on their belt, for one thing, carry a Leatherman or carry a knife of some sort, because what became sort of my way of coping through it was I fumbled around and was able to get my Leatherman out and started to dig into the dirt to make a better breathing space. And I would dig a little bit and then get as close as I could to the ground to get the cleanest air that was, cooler, and just take a breath and then come back up and start digging again, and then breathe, dig, and breathe. And that was my way of staying focused and staying calm and finding the good air. And, as far as I'm concerned, that saved me, we got to take this seriously. Let's not, you don't go into your shelter laughing and joking. You go into your shelter, in a serious mode and fully realizing that this is some stuff that you have to pay attention to and be ready for. It's a worst case scenario, and this shouldn't happen. And that's one reason why we're all back out here today, is to make sure it doesn't happen. But, we are human beings, and it's probably inevitable that this might happen again, so the best thing you can do is just get as well prepared as possible for it. This is kind of an issue I've had all this season, is not taking advantage of teachable moments, and taking advantage of being in the field and pulling out a scenario in the field. Or say you're staging for 12 hours a day and you're just hanging out, because that's the way things work when you're staging. Well, take advantage of pulling out 2 hours. Pull out your Fireline handbook. Get your crew boss, make suggestions of trainings you want to receive, or your squad bosses, or crew boss trainees, or whoever it is. But taking advantage of those moments. Just to get the training, especially the safety stuff. It'd be a waste if you didn't take advantage of that. And I think crew members sort of have to take some of their own initiative to ask for the training and sort of make some formal requests and say, hey, we need this, provide it for us. And I think if the forum is created for them to be able to have that voice, I think, it's only going to get better. The fire crews are going to get better, they're going to get better trained, and they're going to have, more leadership coming from the bottom up, which I think is important, taking responsibility.
I would say that, there's a time to joke around and have fun and make this job a good time and pass along memories and whatnot. But when it comes down to it, the people that are working next to you, you may not see them again if something goes wrong. And it's a very serious job we have here, and people will go their entire lives and their entire careers without deploying to shelters or being put in the situation that I was put in. And so I think if people go into it knowing that, knowing the outcome of mistakes and whatnot, because never in my wildest dreams would I assume that this would happen. And it came down to one day, changed a lot of people's aspects on life. Because there's no real reason why I should be standing here talking to you right now with the events that happened here at 30 Mile. It's changed a lot of things for me. and whatever safety issues can be brought up and addressed from this incident. That's about all we can do with this.